almost 2%. So a downturn for the stock market, maybe even the economy. Is this recovery in need of a recovery? Peter Schiff thinks so, and it's more than just a bump in the road. Peter is the CEO of Euro Pacific Capital. Peter, you fuss and moan about the Federal Reserve all the time, but does this give the central bank leeway and room to take even more action because the economy looks weak?
Well, unfortunately, it's going to take more action, but the action it takes isn't going to help the economy. It will make gasoline more expensive for Americans who want to buy it, as well as everything else. But the Fed can't help the economy. It can create inflation. And when it creates inflation, sometimes it creates the illusion of a growing economy. But you don't want to mistake illusion for reality. You know, we had a rough jobs number. They're going to get a lot rougher. A lot of the jobs that were created over the past year or two are going to be lost because they were phony. They were created based on cheap money. But the same cheap money that gave us these phony jobs is responsible for rising prices. Eventually, the bond market's going to figure it out. The Fed's not going to be able to manipulate interest rates any longer, and interest rates are going to rise as well as the price of gas.
Well, where's the inflation? That's at least what the Treasury market is saying, Peter. And gasoline prices are up, many food prices are up, but you have home prices that are still falling.
Well, that's not, has nothing to do with inflation. I mean, yes, asset prices are coming down, but the cost, if you actually want to buy a house and you want to pay your electric bills, you want to pay your maintenance, you want to pay for your insurance, you want to pay your property taxes, I would say the cost of owning a home is going up, even though the price of buying one is going down. And look at rents. Rents are going up all around this country.
Rents are recovering is how many people would describe it. But, Peter, do you think, though, talking about gasoline prices and some of these inflated prices that are hitting Americans, do you blame the Federal Reserve directly for that?
Absolutely. I mean, I also blame Congress and the president, because if it wasn't for these big budget deficits, then the Fed wouldn't have to print all this money up to monetize it. But I think the principal blame rests at the Federal Reserve. Just like the Federal Reserve caused the housing bubble, the Federal Reserve is the one that is responsible, because if the Federal Reserve was independent and had a tighter monetary policy, it would be impossible for the government to run these big deficits. But remember when the Fed was inflating the housing bubble, they lied and pretended it didn't exist. The Federal Reserve Bank in New York actually commissioned a study in 2004 that concluded that there was no evidence of a housing bubble. And Ben Bernanke himself denied there was a housing bubble even after it burst in 2007. So the same way they lied about the housing bubble they created, they're lying now about all the inflation. They're hiding behind these phony CPI numbers to pretend there's no inflation because they don't want to raise interest rates, just like they didn't want to raise interest rates back in 04 and 05, or at least they didn't want to raise them at a faster clip than the quarter point that they were. So they had to deny the obvious, and they're doing it again because they have an agenda, which is to postpone the pain until after the election.
Are you suggesting, though, that the Federal Reserve is in cahoots with the White House? Because, Peter, I mean, people could argue that Ben Bernanke and company don't want to do anything one way or another that would sway the election. But to suggest that is going pretty far, too far.
No.
Did we lose Peter? I think we did lose Peter. I apologize, Peter, because that was a very pointed question. I promise to have you back on very soon to answer that. But again, we were getting into a terrific discussion. That was Peter Schiff of Euro Pacific.